A manufactured scream for help sliced through the hushed ambience of one of New York City's most expensive restaurants. A beautiful woman, collapsing theatrically into the arms of a powerful billionaire. It was a perfect, tragic scene, meticulously designed to steal sympathy and secure a fortune. But miles away, in a silent, sun-drenched penthouse, a real tragedy was unfolding. While the liar clutched her stomach in a calculated performance, the billionaire's pregnant wife clutched hers in genuine agony. Her life, and the life of their unborn child, were seeping away in silent pools of crimson. This isn't just a story of infidelity. It's the story of a single phone call, a single choice, and how one man's devastating mistake, fueled by a venomous lie, led to a point of no return. Stay with us as we unravel the story of the fall that was fake, and the bleeding that was terrifyingly real. Annalise Thorne believed her life was a masterpiece in progress. At 29, she was the wife of Julian Thorne, a man whose name was synonymous with New York real estate titan of industry whose ambition was as towering as the skyscrapers he erected. Their home was a sprawling penthouse on the 75th floor of 157, a glass palace overlooking the emerald expanse of Central Park. From this vantage point, the city seemed a toy set, a kingdom she shared with her king. But the true jewel of her life wasn't the floor-to-ceiling windows or the Jean-Michel Basquiat painting in the foyer. It was the gentle, fluttering life within her. At 8.5 months pregnant, Annalise was on the precipice of her greatest creation, a love made tangible. The nursery was painted a soft, calming shade of duck egg blue. A custom-built crib from a Scandinavian artisan sat in the corner, and a mobile of hand-felted stars and planets dangled above a tiny galaxy waiting for its sun. She would often stand in the doorway, one hand on her burgeoning belly, and whisper his name, Leo. Little Leo Thorne. Her love for Julian was as vast and dizzying as the view from their window. They had met in a whirlwind of charity galas and society events, her quiet intelligence as an up-and-coming architect a grounding force for his restless energy. He wasn't just a caricature of wealth, he was brilliant, charming, and when he looked at her, she felt like the only person in the universe. In the beginning, anyway. Lately, a subtle chill had crept into their gilded cage. Julian was distant. He chalked it up to a high-stakes merger, his phone a permanent fixture in his hand, his nights spent hunched over a laptop, the glow illuminating the hard, unfamiliar set of his jaw. He was physically present, but his spirit was elsewhere. Annalise told herself it was temporary, the price of ambition. She would make excuses for the cancelled dinner dates, the terse conversations, the way his eyes would sometimes glaze over as she spoke about Leo's latest kick. This afternoon was different. A strange, persistent cramp had taken root in her lower back. It started as a dull ache, the kind she'd grown accustomed to, but it was slowly sharpening, coiling tighter and tighter. She waddled from the nursery to the living room, the plush silk rug doing little to comfort her aching feet. She lowered herself onto the custom-designed Roche-Beaubois sofa, its soft gray velvet usually a haven of comfort. Today, it felt like a cage. She tried to reach Julian, but his line was busy. It was always busy. Finally, after her fourth try, he picked up. Annalise, I'm in the middle of something. Is it important? His voice was clipped, impatient. Julian, hi, she began, trying to keep her tone light. I'm not feeling great. This backache is a little more intense than usual. I was thinking maybe you could come home a bit early. We could just. It's just pregnancy pains, Annie, he cut in, the pet name feeling less like an endearment and more like a dismissal. You're at the end. It's normal. Dr. Miller said to expect discomfort. I'm about to walk into a crucial meeting. I can't just leave. We'll talk tonight. But Julian, it feels sharp, she insisted, a frisson of genuine fear prickling her skin. The cramp was wrapping around her abdomen now, a tightening band of steel. A sigh on the other end of the line, a sound heavy with burden. Annalise, I have the entire board of directors for the Sinclair project waiting for me. I promise I'll be home as soon as I can. Just take a warm bath. Call Chloe if you're worried. I have to go. Before she could protest further, the line went dead. He hadn't even said, I love you. He had suggested she call her best friend. The casual delegation of his most sacred duty as her husband, as the father of their child, sent a spike of fear through her, colder and sharper than the physical pain. She sat in the cavernous silence of the penthouse, the city's muted hum a world away. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, but Annalise didn't notice. Her world had shrunk to the geography of her own body, to the escalating war being waged within her. She tried to stand, to follow his advice and run a bath, but a sudden, vicious contraction buckled her knees. It stole her breath, a white-hot agony that radiated from her spine to her navel. She gasped, clutching the arm of the sofa. Her hand came away wet. She looked down, her heart stopping cold. A dark crimson stain was spreading rapidly across the light gray velvet of the designer couch. It was blood. Not a spot, but a flow, a terrifying, undeniable river of red. Panic seized her, cold and absolute. Julian, she whispered to the empty room, the name a useless prayer. He wasn't coming. He was in a meeting. He told her to take a bath. Alone, 75 floors above the city that was supposed to be theirs, Annalise Thorne began to bleed. Meanwhile, Julian Thorne was not walking into a board meeting. He was walking into a different kind of negotiation, one with far more personal stakes. He pushed open the door to a sleek, modern apartment in Soho, an apartment he paid for. And in the center of the living room, looking artfully distressed, was Sloane Hayes. Sloane was everything Annalise wasn't. Where Annalise was serene elegance, Sloane was fiery chaos. A junior analyst at a rival firm, she had latched on to Julian with a ferocity that he had initially found intoxicating. She was an escape, a thrilling, dangerous detour from his structured life. But the detour had become a trap. I can't do this anymore, Julian, she said, her voice trembling. Her large, expressive eyes were already glistening with unshed tears. This hiding, this waiting. Knowing your wife is at home painting a nursery for a baby that should have been ours. This was her new, venomous tactic. A few months ago, after a scare she had entirely fabricated, she'd begun to hint at a pregnancy she'd lost. There was never a baby, but it was a powerful weapon, one she wielded with surgical precision to stoke his guilt. Sloane, we've talked about this, Julian said, his voice weary. The stress of the merger was real, but the stress of this double life was corrosive. It's complicated. It's not complicated, she shot back, her voice rising. It's simple. You love me, not her. You're just too much of a coward to admit it, to blow up your perfect little life. He ran a hand through his hair. My wife is 8.5 months pregnant, Sloane. I can't leave her. Not now. So, you'll leave me instead, she whispered, the tears finally spilling over, tracing shimmering paths down her cheeks. After everything? I need you, Julian. I feel so fragile, so scared all the time. He stepped towards her, his resolve melting as it always did under the heat of her manufactured crisis. He was a man who could command boardrooms and bend markets to his will, but before this woman, he was hopelessly weak. He pulled her into an embrace, her slender frame shaking against his. I just need some time, he murmured into her hair. Time is the one thing I don't have, she said, pulling back to look at him, her eyes wide with a desperate, brilliant idea. Let's go out tonight. Somewhere public. I want to feel like a normal couple, just for one night. Please, let's go to Per Se. We'll have dinner, look at the lights, and remind ourselves of what we're fighting for. Per Se, Thomas Keller's Temple of Gastronomy, a place where reservations were a blood sport, a place for celebrations, for proposals, for moments that mattered. A place he should be taking Annalise. The guilt was a physical thing, a stone in his gut, but Sloane was looking at him with such pleading vulnerability. One dinner. What harm could one dinner do? Okay, he said, the word sealing his fate. Go get ready. I'll make the call. As Sloane went to the bedroom, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips, Julian took out his phone. He saw the missed call from Annalise from 20 minutes ago. For a fleeting second, he felt a pang of unease. He almost called her back, but then he remembered her words, this backache is a little more intense. Pregnancy pains. He pushed the feeling down. Annalise was strong. She had Chloe. She would be fine. He dialed his concierge, the number on speed dial. Yes, this is Julian Thorne. I need a table for 2 at Per Se tonight. As soon as possible. Yes, I'll hold. As he waited, staring out the window at the distant spire of his own apartment building, he had no idea that the woman he was trying to placate was preparing for the performance of a lifetime. And the woman he was neglecting, the woman carrying his son, was fighting for her life, her silent screams absorbed by the luxurious, soundproofed walls of their beautiful, empty home. Sloane Hayes was an artist, and her medium was deceit. As she stood before the mirror in her bedroom, she wasn't just applying makeup, she was donning a mask. A light dusting of powder to mattify her skin, a touch of highlighter to feign a healthy glow that she could later claim was a brave face, and a careful application of waterproof mascara. The tears had to look real, but they couldn't be allowed to ruin the masterpiece. She chose her costume with equal care, a simple, elegant black dress. It was form-fitting enough to be alluring but conservative enough to appear vulnerable, respectable. It was the dress of a victim, not a vixen. She practiced her expressions in the mirror, the brave, trembling smile, the wide, frightened eyes, the subtle wince as if clutching a secret emotional wound. She knew Julian's psychology better than he knew it himself. He was a man drowning in obligation to his family name, to his business, to his pregnant wife. Sloane had positioned herself not as another obligation, but as an escape. And now, she was transforming that escape into a crisis he felt compelled to solve. The lost baby was a stroke of genius, a phantom tragedy that bound him to her with invisible chains of guilt. Tonight's public dinner was the next phase of her campaign. It was a power play, a way to insert herself into his world so visibly that he couldn't ignore her. When Julian returned to the living room, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed wealth and power, she was ready. She took his arm, her touch light, almost reverent. "Thank you, Julian," she whispered, looking up at him through her lashes. "This means everything to me." The drive to the Deutsche Bank Center, where Per Se presided over Columbus Circle, was quiet. Julian was tense, his knuckles white on the steering wheel of his Aston Martin. Sloane knew better than to push. She let the silence fester, allowing his imagination to fill in the blanks with her supposed sorrow and his own mounting guilt. Per Se was exactly as she'd imagined, a sanctuary of hushed tones, understated luxury, and reverent diners. The iconic blue door opened into a world of serene elegance. They were led to a prime table, one with a sweeping view of the glittering necklace of lights that was Central Park South. From here, she could almost see the building where Annalise Wassa thought that brought a flicker of cruel satisfaction. "It's beautiful," Sloane said, her voice breathy. "Sloane, about what you said earlier," Julian began, his brow furrowed. Sloane placed her fingers gently on his. "No," she said softly. "Not tonight. Tonight, let's not talk about the complications. Let's just be us." She was a master puppeteer, and he was dancing on her strings. She steered the conversation to safe, neutral topics, art, travel, his latest business triumph. She listened with rapt attention, making him feel seen, heard, and admired. She was selling him a fantasia life where he was unburdened, where his only duty was to his own happiness, which, she implied, was intrinsically linked to hers. They ordered the tasting menu, a symphony of exquisite dishes. With each course, Sloane felt her power over him solidifying. He was relaxing, the tension easing from his shoulders. He was laughing at her stories, his eyes holding hers across the table. She had him. He was hers for the taking. The final act was all that remained. As the waiter cleared their dessert plates, Sloane knew it was time. She looked at Julian, her expression shifting from contentment to a carefully crafted melancholy. "I should use the restroom before we leave," she said quietly, her voice catching just enough to signal a change in mood. She stood up, and as she did, she allowed her body to sway for just a second, a flicker of dizziness. She put a hand to her head. "Are you all right?" Julian asked, his concern instantly piqued. "Yes, I'm fine," she lied, her voice a little too bright. "Just stood up too fast." She took 2 steps away from the table, into the main walkway where the staff and other patrons were moving. This was her stage. She had to time it perfectly. She saw a waiter approaching with a tray of drinks. As he passed, she let out a small, sharp gasp. She didn't throw herself to the ground. That would be too theatrical, too unbelievable. Instead, she stumbled, her ankle appearing to twist unnaturally beneath her. Her hand flew out, not to break her fall, but to clutch at her lower abdomen. It was a deliberate, cruel echo of a pregnant woman's protective gesture. "Oh," she cried out, a sound of pure shock and pain. She collapsed onto the thick, plush carpet, not with a hard thud, but in a heap of feigned fragility. It was a silent, graceful fall, the kind that draws immediate, horrified sympathy. "Sloane!" Julian yelled, leaping from his chair. He was at her side in an instant. The entire restaurant fell silent. Every eye was on them. Waitstaff rushed over. "My stomach," she whimpered, curling into a fetal position, her hand still pressed firmly against her abdomen. "Julian, it hurts." The implication was clear, hanging poisonously in the air. The fall, the stomach pain, the memory of the lost pregnancy, it all coalesced into one terrifying possibility in Julian's mind. "Is there a doctor?" a manager asked, his voice full of panic. "No, forget that," Julian commanded, his voice ringing with authority and fear. He scooped Sloane into his arms, her head lolling against his shoulder. "I'm taking her to the hospital. Now." He carried her through the stunned restaurant, past the gawking faces of New York's elite. He didn't see their pity or their curiosity, he saw only Sloane's pale, pained face. He felt only the crushing weight of his own guilt. He had pushed her to this. His indecision, his complicated life, had caused this. He was responsible. As he burst through the blue doors and onto the street, barking at the valet to bring his car around immediately, he didn't once think to check his phone. He didn't see the screen light up again and again with incoming calls from a number he knew as well as his own, Chloe. He didn't hear the frantic, desperate pleas that were being left in his voicemail. The only pain he could see was the one being expertly performed in his arms. The real agony, the life-and-death struggle happening miles away in his own home, was a tragedy playing out to an audience of one. Sloane had successfully hijacked his sympathy, his focus, and his presence. And as he laid her gently in the passenger seat of his Aston Martin and sped towards the emergency room of Lenox Hill Hospital, he felt like a hero, rushing to save a life, utterly oblivious to the fact that he was abandoning the 2 lives that should have mattered most. The silence in the penthouse was a living entity, vast and suffocating. For Annalise, time had warped, stretching and snapping in rhythm with the waves of agony that crashed over her. The initial bleed had been a shock, a splash of crimson against gray velvet. Now, it was a tide. With every searing contraction, she felt a fresh, warm gush, a visceral reminder of the life force that was draining out of her and away from her son. "Help," she mouthed, but the word was a dry rasp, lost in the plush confines of the room. Her phone lay on the marble coffee table, a sleek black rectangle of hope, but it was a universe away. It may as well have been on the moon. She tried to crawl. The movement was excruciating. Every inch was a battle against the fire in her abdomen and the dizzying weakness that was beginning to cloud her vision. The beautiful rug felt like a desert of sandpaper against her skin. Her world, once so expansive and full of light, had shrunk to this small, desperate journey across the floor. The city lights began to blur through the window, the twinkling panorama becoming a smear of indifferent colors. Leo, she thought, the name a silent scream in her mind. Stay with me, Leo. Please stay with me. Mommy's here. Her hand instinctively went to her belly, a gesture of protection that felt terrifyingly futile. The kicks, which had been so strong and reassuring just hours ago, were now weak, frantic flutters. Or was she imagining them? The panic was a coiling snake in her chest, squeezing the air from her lungs. Where was Julian? The question echoed in the hollows of her fear. A board meeting. He was in a board meeting. He was choosing balance sheets over his own blood. A bitter, cold fury mixed with the pain. How could he not know? How could he not feel that something was catastrophically wrong? Their connection, which she had believed to be the bedrock of her world, felt like a phantom limbo thing she could remember but no longer feel. Her fingers brushed against the cool, sharp edge of the coffee table's steel leg. Hope, sharp and desperate, surged through her. With a guttural sob, she hauled herself up, her arm trembling with the effort. Her vision swam with black spots. She slumped against the table, her cheek pressed against the cold marble. The phone was there. Just there. Her fingers were clumsy, slick with sweat. She fumbled with the unlock code, her trembling thumb smudging the screen. Once. Twice. The third time, it opened. Her contacts list swam before her eyes. She couldn't focus on the letters. Juln. She tried to press his name, but a wave of dizziness washed over her and her finger slipped, hitting the contact just below. Chloe. It was enough. She pressed the call button and slumped back to the floor, the phone clattering from her grasp. She could hear the faint, tiny sound of ringing. 1 ring. 2 rings. Chloe, her best friend since college, her maid of honor, her rock, answered on the third. Annie. You won't believe the day I'm having. The caterer for the gallery opening is trying to tell me that Brie is the new camembert. Can you imagine? Annalise tried to speak, to scream, to form a word. All that came out was a low, guttural moan, a sound of pure, animal pain. The cheerful chatter on the other end of the line stopped instantly. Annalise? Annie? What was that? Are you okay? Silence. Only the sound of Annalise's ragged, shallow breathing. Annalise, talk to me. What's wrong? Chloe's voice was sharp now, laced with rising panic. Are you there? Is it the baby? Annalise managed to push a single word from her lips, a desperate, airy whisper that was almost lost. Bleeding. That was all Chloe needed to hear. The line went dead, but it wasn't a hang-up. It was the sound of action. Annalise lay on the floor, the last of her strength gone. The world was fading to gray at the edges. Her last conscious thought was of the tiny hand-felted planets dangling over an empty crib, a silent, lonely galaxy. 15 minutes later, the serene, exclusive quiet of the 75th floor was shattered. A frantic banging echoed on the solid oak door of the penthouse. Annalise. It's me, Chloe. Open the door. When there was no answer, Chloe didn't hesitate. She had a key, a privilege granted years ago. Her hands shook as she fumbled with the lock. The moment the door swung open, a gasp of horror caught in her throat. The scene was one of carnage. The beautiful, pristine living room looked like a war zone. And at the center of it was Annalise, a pale, still figure in a pool of blood that had soaked deep into the fibers of the priceless rug. Oh God! Oh my God, Annalise! Chloe screamed, rushing to her side. She dropped to her knees, not caring about the blood that soaked into her jeans. Annalaise's skin was clammy and cold, her breathing terrifyingly shallow. Chloe's hands flew to her own phone, her fingers a blur as she dialed 911. "I need an ambulance. My friend is pregnant and she's bleeding. She's unconscious. 157, West 57th Street, penthouse 75. Please hurry." While she was on the phone with the dispatcher, her other hand was already scrolling through her contacts, her thumb hovering over Julian's name. She hit call. It went straight to voicemail. "Julian, where the hell are you?" she shrieked into the phone, her voice cracking with rage and fear. "Annalise is bleeding. She's unconscious. I'm calling an ambulance. She's losing the baby, Julian. She might be dying. Get to Mount Sinai now." She hung up and tried again. Voicemail. And again. Voicemail. The fury that filled her was volcanic. He was unreachable. While his wife was bleeding out on their living room floor, her life and their child's life hanging by a thread, he was utterly, inexplicably unreachable. The wail of sirens grew from a distant cry to a deafening roar. The building's high-security staff, alerted by the emergency call, were already waiting at the elevator. Paramedics burst into the room, their movements swift, professional, and urgent. They took one look at the scene and their faces became masks of grim focus. Massive hemorrhage, likely placental abruption. "Let's get her on the gurney, now. We need to move." Starting 2 large-bore IVs, pushing fluids wide open. Chloe watched, helpless, as they worked on her friend, strapping an oxygen mask to her pale face, wrapping her in blankets, maneuvering her with practiced efficiency. They were a whirlwind of life-saving action, a stark contrast to the deathly stillness of Annalise. As they wheeled the gurney out of the apartment, Chloe took one last look at the room. The blood-soaked sofa, the abandoned phone on the floor. The afternoon sun was gone, and the city lights blinked on, a billion indifferent stars in a concrete sky. It was a beautiful, terrible, lonely place. She slammed the door shut on the gilded cage and ran to follow her friend, her heart a cold, hard stone of dread in her chest. The fight for Annalise and Leo had just begun, and their supposed protector was nowhere to be found. The emergency room at Lenox Hill Hospital was a controlled chaos of beeping machines and briskly moving staff. Julian, however, had bypassed most of it. His name, and the silent, powerful language of his black Amex card, had secured Sloane a private room in the ER observation wing almost immediately. Sloane lay on the gurney, the picture of fragile beauty. She'd managed to keep the performance going, wincing at appropriate moments and clutching Julian's hand as if it were a lifeline. A harried-looking ER doctor, a Dr. Evans, had done a preliminary check. "We'll need to run some tests," he'd said, his eyes already on the next patient in the packed hallway. "Blood work and an ultrasound, just to be safe. But her vitals are stable. I don't see anything immediately alarming." It was the fall, Julian insisted, his voice tight with anxiety. "She fell hard. She said her stomach hurts. She had a complication a few months ago." He couldn't bring himself to say the word miscarriage out loud. Dr. Evans nodded, making a note on his chart. "We'll be thorough. A nurse will be in shortly to draw blood." As soon as the doctor left, Sloane's eyes fluttered open. "Is he gone?" she whispered. "He's gone. They're going to run some tests," Julian said, stroking her hair. "You just rest. Don't leave me," she pleaded, her grip on his hand tightening. "I'm so scared." "I'm not going anywhere," he promised, settling into the uncomfortable visitor's chair. He pulled out his phone, intending to text his assistant to cancel his morning appointments. But the moment the screen lit up, he frowned. No service. The thick, old walls of the hospital wing seemed to be a dead zone. He felt a flicker of annoyance, but it was quickly replaced by his focus on Sloane. The outside world could wait. An hour bled into 2. A nurse came and went, drawing blood with practiced ease. Sloane remained in her role, dozing fitfully, occasionally letting out a soft moan. Julian sat vigil, his guilt and anxiety a toxic cocktail in his stomach. He was doing the right thing. He was being responsible. He was protecting the vulnerable woman before him. The shift change brought a new doctor to their door. She was older than Dr. Evans, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She carried a tablet, her expression calm and professional. "Mr. Thorne, I'm Dr. Lena Hansen," she said, her voice even. "I'm taking over for Dr. Evans. I have the preliminary results from Ms. Hayes's tests." Julian stood up, his heart pounding. "Is she okay?" Dr. Hansen didn't answer immediately. Instead, she looked at the chart, then at Sloane, then back at Julian. Her gaze was unervingly direct. "Mr. Thorne, we did a full physical examination. There are no signs of external trauma. No bruising, no scrapes, no swelling on her ankle. Nothing consistent with a fall of the nature you described." Julian stared at her, confused. "But she collapsed. I saw her. The whole restaurant saw her." "I have no doubt she ended up on the floor," Dr. Hansen said carefully. "I'm simply stating that medically, there is no evidence of an impact. Furthermore, the abdominal ultrasound is perfectly clear. There are no signs of internal injury. All her organs are fine. In fact," she added, her eyes narrowing slightly, "everything is textbook normal." A cold seed of doubt, small and hard, planted itself in Julian's mind. But she was in pain. She was crying, holding her stomach. "The blood work is also back," Dr. Hansen continued, ignoring his protest, her tone becoming firmer, clinical. "Her white blood cell count is normal. No markers for inflammation or internal bleeding. Her hormone levels are completely standard." She paused, letting the weight of her next word settle. "Mr. Thorne, is there any reason Ms. Hayes would lead you to believe she was, or had recently been, pregnant?" The question hit Julian like a physical blow. She lost a baby a few months ago." The word sounded thin and foolish in the sterile air of the hospital room. Dr. Hansen's expression was one of profound, professional pity, but her words were razor-sharp. "According to the comprehensive panel we ran, her HCG levels are negligible. That's the pregnancy hormone, Mr. Thorne. They wouldn't be zero if she'd had a miscarriage just a few months ago. In fact," the doctor continued, her voice unwavering, "there is no medical indication she has been pregnant at any time in the last year. Medically speaking, it's an impossibility." The room tilted. Dr. Hansen's words were a foreign language he was struggling to comprehend, but the meaning was slowly, horrifically dawning on him. No fall. No injury. No recent pregnancy. No lost baby. It was all a lie. A sick, elaborate, manipulative lie. His head snapped towards the bed. Sloane was awake. She had heard everything. The mask of fragility was gone, replaced by a cornered, panicked glare. Her eyes darted between the doctor's impassive face and Julian's thunderstruck one. "She's lying," Sloane croaked, her voice raw. "You're trying to protect him. He's a married man." Dr. Hansen didn't even flinch. "I am a doctor, Ms. Hayes. I am protecting my license by reporting the medical facts. And the facts are, there is absolutely nothing wrong with you." The cold, hard truth of it slammed into Julian. The fragility, the fear, the dinner at per se, the perfectly timed, graceful fall, the hand on the stomach. It was a performance. All of it. He had been played for the world's biggest fool. Just as the full scope of her deception crashed down on him, he remembered his phone. He strode to the doorway, desperate for a signal, for a connection to the real world he had abandoned. As he stepped into the main corridor, the screen lit up. 17 missed calls, Chloe. 5 new voicemails. His blood ran cold. His thumb, shaking, pressed the first voicemail. Chloe's voice, not her usual cheerful lilt but a raw, terrified scream, tore through the phone speaker. Julian, where the hell are you? Annalise is bleeding. She's unconscious. I'm calling an ambulance. He stumbled back against the wall, his breath catching in his lungs. He clicked the next message. She's losing the baby, Julian. She might be dying. Get to Mount Sinai now. The next. Why aren't you answering your phone? They're taking her into surgery. They said it's a placental abruption. Do you even know what that is? Her life is in danger, you selfish bastard. The next. She's been in surgery for 2 hours. We don't know anything. Her parents are on a plane from Chicago, but her husband. Her husband is missing in action. I hope your meeting was worth it, Julian. I hope it was worth her life. The final message was just choked, furious sobbing. The world dissolved into a meaningless hum. Dr. Hansen's words about a fake injury collided with Chloe's words about a real, life-threatening catastrophe. The two realities crashed together in his mind, and the wreckage was his own staggering, unforgivable stupidity. He looked back into the room. Sloane was sitting up now, her face a mask of fury. Julian, don't listen to that woman. He saw her then. Truly saw her for the first time. Not as a thrilling escape, not as a fragile victim, but as a parasite. A venomous, calculating parasite who had faked a fall while his wife was actually collapsing, who had feigned stomach pain while his wife was bleeding out, who had demanded his presence while his son was fighting for his first breath. A sound escaped his throat, a primal groan of horror and self-loathing. He turned and ran. He didn't say a word to Sloane. He didn't look back. He just ran, his expensive shoes pounding against the polished linoleum, the sound of Chloe's frantic sobs echoing in his ears, a soundtrack to the ruin he had made of his life. The drive from Lenox Hill to Mount Sinai was a blur of screeching tires and blaring horns. Julian drove like a man possessed, the sleek Aston Martin a missile of his own making, aimed at the heart of his failure. The 15-minute journey felt like an eternity. Every red light was a personal judgment, every second a tick closer to a verdict he was terrified to hear. He abandoned the car at the entrance to the emergency room, not even waiting for the valet, and sprinted inside. The scene was starkly different from the curated calm of Lenox Hill. This was a crucible of real human suffering. There was no private wing for him here. There was only the harsh fluorescent lighting, the smell of antiseptic, and the raw, unfiltered sounds of pain and fear. He spotted Chloe immediately. She was pacing in the surgical waiting area, her face pale and tear-streaked, her hair a mess. The moment she saw him, her grief-stricken expression hardened into one of pure, unadulterated rage. She marched up to him and, before he could speak, she slapped him. The sound cracked through the tense quiet of the waiting room. Heads turned. A security guard took a step forward. "Where were you?" she hissed, her voice low and trembling with fury. "I called you. I screamed for you. Annalise needed you. And you were gone. Chloe, I didn't know," he stammered, the sting on his cheek nothing compared to the evisceration of his soul. "My phone. There was no service. I was with someone. At the hospital." "At the hospital," she scoffed, a bitter, humorless laugh escaping her lips. "Was your little playmate feeling under the weather? Did she have a headache? Annalise was bleeding to death on your living room floor, her placenta detached from the uterine wall. The doctor said it was like a ticking bomb inside of her, starving your son of oxygen, drowning her in her own blood." Every word was a nail hammered into his conscience. He flinched as if physically struck again. "Is she? Is Leo?" He couldn't finish the sentence. The name of his son felt like ash in his mouth. "She's out of surgery, Chloe said, her rage momentarily giving way to exhaustion. She finally looked as broken as he felt. She survived. The baby. Leo. He survived. He was born via emergency C-section. He's 3 pounds, 4 ounces. They took him straight to the NICU. He's fighting. Relief washed over Julian so intensely his knees buckled. He gripped the back of a chair to steady himself. He's alive. Annalise is alive. No thanks to you, Chloe spat, the venom returning. They were waiting for you to sign consent forms, Julian. Her husband. But you weren't there. I had to plead with the hospital administration, get emergency legal clearance. While you were wherever you were, your wife's life was being debated by lawyers. The shame was a physical shroud, heavy and suffocating. He had no defense. No explanation could possibly measure up to the magnitude of his dereliction. He had failed in his most fundamental duty as a husband and a father, and he had done it for a lie. A doctor in blue scrubs approached them, her face etched with fatigue. Family of Annalise Thorne. I'm her husband, Julian said, his voice a croak. Chloe shot him a look of pure poison but remained silent. I'm Dr. Sterling, the head of obstetrics. It was a very close call, Mr. Thorne. The placental abruption was severe. We had to perform an emergency hysterectomy to control the bleeding. The doctor paused, her gaze softening with pity. Annalise is stable, but the surgery was extensive. It means she won't be able to have any more children. The finality of those words was absolute. He had not only almost cost Annalise her life and the life of their son, but he had also cost them their future. The family they had planned, the siblings Leo would have had, all of it was gone, sacrificed at the altar of his own weakness and Sloane's treachery. Can I see her? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. She's in recovery. She's weak, but she's awake, the doctor said. And Mr. Thorne. She's been asking for you. Chloe's head snapped up. She's asking for him. The doctor gave a sad, knowing smile. Sometimes in moments like these, people just want the person they're supposed to rely on. That small, undeserved grace was the most painful blow of all. After his catastrophic failure, after his unforgivable absence, she was still asking for him. Chloe led him through a maze of corridors to the post-op recovery unit. She stopped outside a door. Don't you dare make this about you, she warned, her voice a low threat. Don't you dare go in there with excuses. All you are allowed to be is sorry. He nodded, his throat too tight to speak. He pushed the door open. Annalise lay in the hospital bed, looking small and fragile against the stark white sheets. And 4 lines snaked into her arm. She was pale, her vibrant energy completely extinguished, but her eyes were open. They were clear, and they were fixed on him. He walked to the bedside, his feet feeling like lead. He reached for her hand, but she pulled it away, a small, weak movement that felt like a chasm opening between them. They told me, she said, her voice a dry, scratchy whisper. About the surgery. About Leo. Annalise, I am so sorry, he began, the words feeling pathetic, inadequate. I can't explain. Chloe tried to call you, she stated. It wasn't a question, but a fact. Her eyes, devoid of anger or hysteria, were what undid him. They held a profound, bottomless disappointment that was far worse than any rage. You didn't answer. I was. My phone was off. I was somewhere I shouldn't have been. I was with someone, he confessed, forcing the truth out. He owed her that much. She faked an emergency to get my attention. And I fell for it like a fool. Annalise closed her eyes for a long moment. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her temple. So while I was bleeding, she whispered, the words precise and devastating, you were with her. There it was. The truth stripped bare of all excuses and complexities. A perfect, terrible symmetry of betrayal. Yes, he said, the word a confession, a condemnation. She opened her eyes again, and the look she gave him was one he would never forget. It was the look of a woman seeing a stranger. The man she loved, the king of her gilded cage, was gone. In his place was just this weak, foolish, broken man. I want to see my son, she said, her voice gaining a sliver of strength. And then, I want you to leave. The request was delivered without malice. It was a simple statement of fact, a boundary being drawn. He had made his choice when he'd ignored her pain and rushed to the side of a liar. Now, she was making hers. He nodded, defeated. He had rushed across the city to face his reckoning, and he had found it not in Chloe's furious slap, or the doctor's grim prognosis, but in his wife's quiet, devastating dismissal. He was no longer her husband. He was just the man who wasn't there. The days that followed were a blur of sterile white corridors and the rhythmic, metronomic beeping of machines. Julian was a ghost haunting the halls of Mount Sinai. He adhered to Annalise's wishes, a specter of a husband. He coordinated with her parents, a grim-faced, silent couple from Chicago who looked at him with undisguised contempt. He handled the hospital bills, the insurance paperwork, the logistics of a life that had been shattered into 1,000 administrative tasks. He did everything a husband should do except the one thing he desperately wanted, to be with his wife and son. He saw Leo only through the thick glass of the neonatal intensive care unit. His son, a tiny, bird-like creature in a plastic box, hooked up to a web of wires and tubes that monitored every fragile breath. Julian would stand there for hours, his hand pressed against the glass, whispering apologies that the baby couldn't hear and a God he wasn't sure he believed in anymore wouldn't answer. He was a father separated from his child by a wall of glass and a mountain of regret. Annalise refused to see him. Chloe acted as a gatekeeper, her expression an impenetrable wall. She's resting, or she's with the lactation consultant, or a simple, cutting, no. He learned about his wife's progress in fragments. She was recovering from the surgery faster than expected, her physical strength returning with a stubborn resilience he'd always admired from a distance, and now saw as a force of nature. She spent every waking moment that the nurses allowed at Leo's incubator, reading to him, singing to him, her voice a low, soothing murmur that Julian could sometimes faintly hear from the hallway. She was forging a bond with their son, creating a world for the two of them, a world from which Julian was explicitly excluded. His other life, the one that had cost him everything, was surgically excised. The day after the incident, he had his lawyer deliver a final, brutal message to Sloane Hayes. The lease on her Soho apartment was terminated. The credit cards were cancelled. A cease and desist letter was delivered by a stony-faced courier, threatening legal action for harassment and emotional distress should she ever attempt to contact him or his family again. He heard through a mutual acquaintance that she was fired from her job for unprofessional conduct. She had gambled everything on one final, dramatic play and had lost spectacularly, vanishing from his world as quickly and chaotically as she had entered it. He felt nothing at her Damasceno satisfaction, no pity, just a profound, hollow emptiness. She was the architect of his ruin, but he was the one who had handed her the blueprints. A week after the birth, Chloe found him slumped in a chair outside the NICU, staring at the "parents only" sign on the door. She held out a large manila envelope. Her lawyer drew these up, she said, her voice devoid of its usual animosity, replaced by a weary resignation. Separation papers. She wants you to move out of the penthouse before she and Leo are discharged. He took the envelope. It felt impossibly heavy. Chloe. Is there any hope? She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since the night of the slap. She saw the exhaustion, the genuine, soul-deep remorse in his eyes. Hope, she repeated softly. Julian, she doesn't hate you. I think that's what's so hard for her. It would be easier if she hated you. But what she feels is nothing. You became a stranger to her that night. You have to understand, when she was in that room, terrified, losing her baby, she wasn't just in physical pain. She was completely and utterly alone. The one person in the entire world who promised to protect her wasn't there. How do you come back from that? How do you learn to trust again when the foundation of that trust has been pulverized? She sighed. If you want my advice, sign the papers. Give her the space she needs. Fight for your son, not by demanding, but by deserving. Be the father Leo needs you to be. And maybe, one day, you can be the man Annalise thought she married. It was the best advice he had ever received. He did as she said. He signed the papers. He hired movers to pack up his belongings from the penthouse, instructing them to leave everything of Annalise and Leo's untouched. He moved into a sterile corporate apartment downtown, a minimalist box that perfectly reflected his hollowed-out life. He sold the Aston Martin, the sight of it a nauseating reminder of his frantic, useless drive. 2 weeks later, Leo was strong enough to go home. Julian was not invited to be there. He could only imagine the scene, Chloe and Annalise's parents helping her, this new, fragile family of 3, entering the home he was banished from. The thought was a quiet agony. He began the slow, painful work of rebuilding. Not his empire, which ran on its own momentum, but himself. He started therapy, the sessions brutal and unflinching, forcing him to confront his own weakness, his need for validation, his cowardice. His only connection to his son was a court-mediated visitation schedule. Twice a week, in the neutral territory of a nearby park, Chloe would arrive with Leo in a stroller. She would hand him the baby, and for one precious hour, Julian would be a father. He learned the specific weight of his son in his arms, the scent of his skin, the sound of his gurgling breaths. He changed diapers on a park bench, fed Leo a bottle with clumsy, careful hands, and walked him around the pond, pointing out the ducks with a gentle voice he barely recognized as his own. He never spoke of his own pain to Annalise, who would sometimes watch from a distance, her expression unreadable. He used his time to talk only about Leo. He smiled today, he'd report to Chloe during one handoff, his voice full of wonder. A real smile, not just gas. He loves looking at the leaves, he'd say another time. His eyes really tracked them. He was building a new foundation, not on grand promises or lavish gifts, but on the small, concrete bricks of fatherhood. He was showing, not telling. Months turned into a year. The seasons changed. Leo grew from a fragile infant into a babbling, curious toddler. Julian's weekly hour became 2, then 3. Sometimes Annalise would walk with them, a careful distance between them. Their conversations were stilted and focused solely on their son. The Arctic chill between them began, ever so slowly, to thaw. It wasn't warmth, not yet, but it was the absence of ice. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Leo took his first wobbly steps on the grass, stumbling into Julian's waiting arms, Annalise spoke. "He needs a father, Julian," she said quietly, watching them. "Not just for a few hours a week." He looked up at her, his heart stopping. He saw in her eyes not the forgiveness he craved, but a fragile, pragmatic acceptance. The stranger was gone, and in his place was the father of her child, a man who had, for one solid year, shown up. "I know," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm not saying I forgive you," she clarified, her gaze unwavering. "I don't know if I ever can. What was broken between us may always be broken. But Leo deserves a whole life, not one split between 2 fractured halves." It wasn't a reunion. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were no soaring declarations of love. But it was a beginning. A door once slammed shut and bolted was being opened just a crack. It was the chance to step out of the cold and into the long, arduous, uncertain work of rebuilding a family from the ashes of betrayal, one small, hesitant step at a time. The gilded cage was gone, and in its place was the messy, complicated, and deeply precious reality of a shared love for their son. 3 years passed. The glass penthouse, once a symbol of isolation and betrayal, slowly transformed. Julian's sterile corporate apartment was long gone. Now, the sprawling space was filled not just with designer furniture, but with the vibrant chaos of a child's life. A brightly colored playmat covered a section of the silk rug. A tiny easel stood near the window, displaying a finger-painted masterpiece of indeterminate subject. It was no longer a showpiece, it was a home. On Leo's third birthday, the apartment was filled with the sounds of laughter. It wasn't a grand society affair, but a small gathering. Chloe was there, laughing as she helped Leo unwrap a gift. Annalie's parents watched from the sofa, their gazes on their grandson soft and full of love. And Julian was in the center of it all, a paper crown askew on his head, making airplane noises as he flew a piece of birthday cake towards a giggling Leo. Later that evening, after the guests had left and Leo was asleep in his duck-egg blue room, Annalise and Julian stood together in the kitchen, quietly packing away leftovers. The silence between them was no longer heavy or cold, it was comfortable, a shared space of understanding. "I never thought we'd be here again," Annalise said softly, not looking at him but at the city lights twinkling below. "Happy?" Julian stopped what he was doing and looked at her. He saw the woman he fell in love with, but stronger, her spirit forged in a fire he had started. "I know," he said, his voice low with an emotion he now knew was simple, profound gratitude. "Every single day, I am grateful for this. For you. For him. I know what I almost lost, Annalise. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure I never forget it." She finally turned to him, and for the first time in years, the deep, impenetrable guard in her eyes was completely gone. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "He's a good kid, Julian. We made a good kid." "We did," he agreed, smiling back. She walked over to him, closing the small space that had once felt like a continent between them. She reached out and took his hand, her fingers lacing through his in a gesture that was both a forgiveness and a promise. The gilded cage had become their sanctuary, built not on wealth or status, but on the hard-won, beautiful reality of a family that had faced the ultimate betrayal and chosen to rebuild, stronger, from the ashes. For now, and for all the days to come, it was more than enough. It was everything. From the depths of deceit to the peak of a hard-earned peace, the journey of Julian, Annalise, and Leo is a powerful reminder that while trust can be shattered in a single moment, rebuilding it is a choice made every single day. The consequences of our actions can be devastating, but the human heart's capacity for forgiveness and resilience can be even greater. If this story of profound mistakes and the powerful grace of second chances resonated with you, please give this video a like and share it with someone who appreciates a story of redemption. And be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss our next tale of human drama, where the highest stakes are always the matters of the heart.